Greetings friends, Jared here with another review from Fanboys Forever, and today I'm coming to you with something quite special, something that very well could be the final review in Mezco's Batman trilogy. Now for those who aren't familiar, just very quickly, the Batman trilogy started when we got the Ascending Knight Batman from Mezco a couple of years back, and then the Sovereign Knight Batman, and finally, now we have moved on to this, the Supreme Knight, and the final Batman, as far as we know anyway, in the trilogy. And we have had three main versions of this figure. Of course, we've had the standard release version right over here. Then we had the Shadow version, which was an MDX version right there. And now finally, the PX version, the one that is a previews exclusive. And when we say previews, we mean the kind of figure that can be carried by comic shops and things like that, exclusive to them. So it's really been quite a cool journey for this figure. This is the same kind of release pattern that we have seen with the previous figures in the Batman trilogy, with an MDX that's black, a standard version that's black and gray, and a PX version that is blue and gray. So it's been really interesting seeing how they've evolved over this time. And if you really want to see an in-depth breakdown of just the standard versions of these other two figures behind the PX version, of course, feel free to check out those reviews, which I have linked in the description below. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what you're getting into going into this. So if you've not seen those reviews yet, you might want to check those out first. All right, guys, so without further ado, let's go ahead and have a closer look. Before we go any further with the actual figure itself, I suppose we should briefly touch on the packaging. He comes in a huge metal tin, which I kind of have a love-hate relationship with these things. Here it is. You can see mine's pretty dinged up from transit, but the seller is taking care of me on that, so I do appreciate that. It's just kind of just very standard yellow with just the regular Bat logo on it. Previews exclusive right there. There's not a whole lot to it. On the back, we get some very inaccurate images of the figure because, as you might be able to tell already, they have changed it significantly since then. So that's just something to be aware of. We get this set of instructions here, which kind of reminds me of the old Kenner days because they're illustrations of a Batman figure, which I always really liked as a kid. And then, of course, we get this, which tells you this is not a toy and don't you dare. Seriously, though, it just says to be careful with it. Moving on to the figure itself, we'll put him back front and center right here. This is interesting because it does represent the blue and gray color scheme that we have come to expect from those PX exclusives. However, looking back at those, I think that each one did something really different with this color scheme. And it's really interesting to look back and see that they're all kind of going for the same sort of comic book motif, that classic, blue and gray Batman look that we see in the older comics. But they all achieve it in very, very different ways. Let's go ahead and just look at the sculpt really quickly. The sculpt isn't anything too new from what we have seen with the other figures. We've come to be familiar with what Mezco is doing with Supreme Knight, and I really think that it holds up very well. I think that with each new release, I don't think that the effect of the excellent sculpt is diminished whatsoever. Here, for this version, we'll get more into it in accessories, there are no short ear options. You only have the long ears for this particular version. Really like this blue on him here. I think that with this blue, they've gone for something they have never tried before, which is almost a metallic look. And I think that that not only comes off well, I think it actually comes off brilliantly. It's really just a lovely, lovely look for the figure. Of course, for this particular blue, I suppose I would refer to it as more of a regal kind of metallic blue. And I think it's just great. I love how it catches the light. And I'm talking not only about the paint on the head sculpt here, but I'm also talking about their choice of fabric on the cape. And the way that they match so well with one another is something that I imagine is incredibly hard to do when you're trying to match paint tone and fabric. But they have really, really done it. And they've come a long way since those initial pictures that we saw of this figure. I remember that originally this figure, the look was kind of a disappointment, I'll be honest. I remember looking at it, and I'm usually kind of a somebody who's usually white knighting these figures from Mezco. And, on that one, I just had to say, yeah, there's a couple of problems. Number one, the logo was way too large on that original version, almost comically large, I think, and it kind of threw the whole figure out of proportion. The other, I think, issue was probably that the gray was too dark. to the point to where it didn't quite make the figure pop. And I think both of those problems have been beautifully addressed here. They actually shrunk down that chest logo quite a bit compared to the original look. And that with a lighter gray has really helped things out tremendously. You can see the bodysuit is exactly the same as we saw with the original Supreme Knight. And the only difference is the tone of gray. So you can see that there's quite a big difference between those tones. Maybe too much of a difference, but we'll get into that later. You can see the belt is finally gold. That's something that I think a lot of people were fairly disappointed by with the original Supreme Knight, is that you had a belt that was just so gray and just so monochromatic that it probably would have helped the figure to have had a little bit of color to break that up. So I do think that this turned out really nicely. It is a little funny that this gold is slightly different than this gold. Moving on down, we can see, and I'll get the cape out of the way a little bit, we can see that the pants have that same kind of porous look, I guess, that the original Supreme release had. But they do seem slightly different, almost as if there's more like kind of tiny little holes, whereas the original release, it looked a little more solid, if that makes sense. And I think you can see it more clearly here. It could just be that these are such a lighter color that the little pock marks show up more. And I think that could be it, but everything else is practically the same. You can see that the gloves themselves over here have all the same great detail that we've seen in the previous releases. But I'll be honest, I like the paint application and what they did with the colors much more here than the previous versions. Say, for instance, you can actually see that they have highlighted different little details on the gauntlets with gold. And I think that that's made a huge difference because you can see all sorts of little details and things that you really couldn't have before. And I like that, how all the little bolts are actually gold. And even at the bottom of the gloves, you can see that on the other side, we have black highlights. We have gray on the inside of the gauntlet. It's just as premium a paint job as you can imagine here. So I think that turned out beautifully. I do like how there's blue buried within the belt. And you can see that within the sections, there's a little bit of blue here and there, even on the holster on the back. You can see that we have a fairly clean seam line on the back as well. And with the boots, you can actually see that just like the gauntlets, you actually have things accentuated with paint here that just weren't in the previous releases. You can see that we actually have gold on the bolts, and they're even down on the shoes right there. We can actually see as we turn it around that that detail continues. A little bit of gray highlights too in different spots, like those little vents. Same thing for the back. And at the bottom, you just have the treads. Not that there's any paint variation down there. So overall, I think that the paint application pops. And there's one more little thing that they did here, which was fairly surprising to me. At first, I actually thought that maybe some of the paint had been skinned off, but then I quickly realized that this was intentional. You see the little gold spots right there? These little gold areas, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 little gold marks on the bat logo. Kind of interesting that they're there, but I suppose it varies it up a little. I'm not sure it was entirely necessary. I think it probably would have been better off just being solid black. It seems a little distracting, in my opinion. But from a distance, I mean, you would never know it was like that. But when you get it at certain angles, I suppose it's to highlight the bat logo a little bit, have some kind of, you see how it catches the light right there, how it has that raised detail. It kind of further accentuates it. I'm just not sure it was necessary, that's all. We've talked about the head sculpts many, many times, but what we've not seen are the new paint applications. So you can see that we actually have those side armor pieces, which are a different color than the main head. And the same goes for the back. You can actually see the gray right there. Get the cape off of it a little bit so that you can see it more clearly. We see more of those vents, more of the gray accents. I think paint-wise, this is definitely the most interesting out of the head sculpts that we've seen. So I just think it pops the most. And I think especially when you have the cape out like this, you get some just terrific 80s kind of Batman art vibes here. It just, I don't know, I think it just works. I believe that if you had shown people pictures of this when this figure was first announced, I think people's jaws would have hit the floor because I think they would have been thrilled to have seen something like this. So I'm so happy to see that it's one of the very few times a product has changed dramatically, I think, due to fan feedback. before it was released, and I do believe that's what this was here. I do believe Mezco took really special note of a lot of the complaints people had with the figure. But yeah, I think as a result of all of those changes, all of those little tweaks and things that they did, that you end up with a very fine figure. And I think it's definitely a highlight out of their Batman trilogy. And it's something that's going to catch your eye on the shelf. This thing is going to stand out amongst all of your other Batmen, I believe. Before we look at anything else to do with the figure, it is worth noting something about the fabric of the cape. This fabric is quite different than what we've had with the other drape capes that we've seen before. And when we say drape capes, we mean this is the one that has no wire in it. Because of that, and it's more of a, I don't know, a buoyant fabric. I know that doesn't make any sense when we're not talking about not being in water here, but what I'm saying is it tends to kind of, you see what I'm saying? Like it has its own little bounce to it. It's kind of got a lot of body to it, if that makes sense. Say, for instance, let's do the classic pose that we do with all of our Mezco Batman figures, where you put it over the shoulders. And it tends to, there's something about the lining of the fabric which causes it to kind of go up a little higher than what we've seen before. So do you see that, how it kind of sets up off of itself a little bit? And I think that's great if you're going for more of the Todd McFarlane kind of Brayfogle sort of Batman look, where his cape would sometimes come up off of his shoulders and kind of get arched and things. So you could, you know, if you work with it a little, you can have things going on like this, to where the cape kind of takes on a life of its own. It's a little irritating, I guess, when you're trying to just get it to lay down just like this. You feel like almost that it needs little weights at the tips to keep it like this, because I think that looks better than it just being kind of poofed. But as you can see, I did just pull it down, and it tended to help it quite a bit. So maybe that's the key. I think it's just a matter of me learning how to work with this cape. And I think once I do that, I think I'll really be able to get some good action figure photography out of this guy. So I'm looking forward to that. Speaking of the cape, though, we all know that it's interchangeable. So if you've seen the previous reviews, you know how this goes. The head is now on a magnet, which is new for Supreme Knight. They'd never done it before. This part lifts up, and you're left with this exposed magnet. You then bring in this wired cape. I think the wired cape basically renders the other almost obsolete. I mean, the drape cape will always be better for certain types of poses, more neutral kind of Batman stances. But in my world of action figure posing and photography, I believe that your wired cape is going to be your friend about 80% of the time when it comes to posing. And there we go. You can see that if you're seeing a full-on exposed circle, then you're good. So we just take the neck piece, put it back over it. Once it makes connection, we should be good to go. And now you have the Chad cape here. This is a joy. You know, I've talked about it with the other versions of the figure, but look at that. I mean, you just basically, you touch the thing and you get iconic Batman cape poses, if you will, if that's a term. I mean, all you got to do, and I'm going back to my old favorites here. I can't help myself. I did this exact same thing with the Shadow version. I just, you know, this is great, but it's so hard not to, when you have this kind of cape, not to take full advantage of it. You can also get some things that are maybe a little more subtle, but the temptation to just go full-on operatic with this is mind-blowing. It's truly a pleasure just to work with the thing. Bend it to your will. How about that? And what's interesting about it is once you have it posed up, it looks so much cooler than the other versions of this cape, and it's all to do with this fabric. I mean, the fabric, as long as you're not just looking at the interior of the cape, which is a little boring, but the exterior is just incredible looking, even from the back. So you can go like this, and it's instantly more interesting than the other versions of this cape. You can flare it out like this. I'm telling you, this is the best 12th scale cape in the business, but you've got to applaud them for their tenacity in creating such a beautiful little work here. But that's enough of me gushing about the cape. I will try my best to be as professional as I can and just keep it together enough to get through the rest of the review. This is so cool! You know that I always like to change up the head sculpts as we go. So for this one, we're going to be changing it up to the smiling head. We're very familiar with this one, whether it's the short-eared version from the original release or it's the shadow version from the MDX release. We know what it looks like. It's Batman's kind of sadistic grinning head. And I love the thing. I think that it's terrifically sculpted and it has quite a bit of personality. So we're just going to chuck that guy right on there. And I think that looks awesome, as expected. But I will say that it's pretty disappointing that they didn't just give us a short-eared head. Because where does that leave us with this guy? And honestly, I think it's my biggest gripe with the whole figure. Without the short-eared head in this very particular paint scheme, I mean, it would be incredibly hard to even replicate this paint scheme as a customizer. I just don't see a way for us to have a short-eared version of this Batman, and it's a real shame. And I'll tell you why it bothers me the most is because I would have really liked to have had a representation of Batman when he fights the mutant leader in The Dark Knight Returns. And I know that they already did that, and it's already comic book accurate, got it right. But I would have liked to have seen, the Supreme Knight version of that look. And, you can't say this isn't supposed to be Dark Knight Returns Batman. Of course it is. So if you're as perturbed by that as I am, then, let me know in the comments. I don't think I'm alone in this. I really am frustrated by it. I would have much rather had the short-eared head than the smirking head here. So, I mean, it's still a great head sculpt, but I just don't understand what the thinking was there. And it really, I don't know. I'm holding out hope that they are going to be offering a head pack for this guy because, well, we've been seeing it lately. We've been seeing them offer head packs, and I think they're a great idea. And I just really hope that they have the foresight to say, here's some extra Batman heads. There's the royal blue version, so you can add it to this thing. Because I'm telling you, I think that they're missing the boat by not giving us a short-eared version. Let's look at articulation just super fast. We know what this guy can do from the original review. I like to put the arm only up about that much. I think any more than that, and what you'll have is the fabric will start to kind of stress, and I don't want that. I know it's very durable, though. I don't think anybody's having a problem with this bodysuit because it's made like the Spec Ops Punisher bodysuit, which is just very durable. It's very stretchy. You can go out really, really far, honestly. You can make his arm go up about that much before I sort of start to get a little uncomfortable about that seam, but honestly, I could push it much further. There's a cut here under the shoulder, and you can bring it out pretty far and look at it. It stretches and does what it needs to do. There is a double joint, but the gauntlet blocks that double joint. However, this one, I do feel like it's crunching a little more than the previous ones were. I have no idea why. You can see that we do have a swivel at the wrist. We do have a hinge. You can make the hand go up and down quite a bit. We do get plenty of head rotation, by the way. It can go up quite a bit, down quite a bit. But remember, if you're pulling quite a bit on this, the whole neck assembly will come off because it's just not a magnet. It's not that bad, but yeah, it's something to watch out for. We do have a cut at the diaphragm, but you can't do too much with it before it starts dressing the costume. You can bring it down a little bit. You can bring it back a little bit. And there is, I'm not sure if there's anything at the waist. There's a little bit of something, but you can't really use it. At the legs, we can get pretty good splits. And there's enough room, especially on this release for some reason. I feel like, do you see that? How there's more room? I feel like that there's more room in the inseam there. Because I don't feel like anything is being stressed. I feel like it was kind of a closer fit on the original. And yeah, I think this is the one that you'll be able to kind of just do whatever you need to do with it. You also get a thigh cut right there, thigh swivel. And because of that extra room, look at what you can do. So I really like having a little bit of extra room right there in the inseam. We can also see that we have a double jointed knee. So he can almost kick his own butt, almost. We get kind of a rotation there at the boot right there. We do get a hinge, but it's not much of one. You can only do so much there. We do have a little bit of an ankle pivot, but there's really not much to it. He can hold wide poses pretty well. And if you work with him a little, you can get it looking just about how you need to. See? So that's without a stand or anything. You can see the stand, but he's not plugged into it. So I think that's pretty reasonable. I think that Mezco's just getting better and better with their Batman releases. And it's the best compliment you can probably give a figure. as you're trying to review the thing, and you just can't help yourself. You want to keep experimenting with different poses. You want to keep doing different things. And this figure is definitely that. And it has something to do with the color scheme and how it all comes together. It has something to do with the fabric and the paint. This is nice. I have to say, this is nice. Let's just look at accessories incredibly quickly, because I think we know what's up here. We do get the wide batarangs, so those are all scuffed up. They're gold, so I like that. That's something you're going to see with all these accessories. Rather than boring you to tears by showing you all the different hands and all the different accessories, how about this? I decided, since we've talked about this figure twice now, let's just do this. Check it out. Here's all of your accessories.
Are you sure you got enough? You can never have enough, brother.
You can see that they are different paint-wise than what we've seen before. There's the Karambat that splits into two. There's the giant batarang. There's the bundle O batarangs. We have the grapnel launcher pieces. We have the grapnel launcher itself, which goes in the back of the belt. And we have Batman's hilarious equalizer cannon. And what he's equalizing with his cannon, I'm not sure. It looks incredibly lethal, although Mezco has been sure to point out in official materials, it is not lethal. I don't know. You tell me, Batman. Is it lethal? Yeah, it's lethal. After 3 of these reviews, we're finally ready to admit, totally lethal weapon.
I'm too old for this.
I would also be remiss without mentioning Batman's stand. Now, we've seen some cool stands in the Supreme Knight series, but honestly, this is the most toyetic of all the stands, and it's very bold in a display. Check this out. I mean, this is how it's going to look on your shelf with the stand, and I think that it's almost like the bat signal is shining down onto the ground for some reason. I don't know why it would be, but I do think that's cool. Here we have a quick comparison between the original and this new version. And it's funny because even though it's the same bodysuit and the same belt sculpt and gauntlets and boots and things, it feels like a very different figure. And it certainly looks like a very different figure. So bravo to Mezco for being able to give us variants that aren't just little things. I mean, they're very, very, very different. And I think that's why Mezco has such success with their Batman variants, because people know that they're a different feel, they're a different experience. And I do think Mezco goes out of their way to make sure that it's a different experience. And here we have, of course, the Shadow version, the MDX of Supreme Knight. And once again, you can see that even though this time the head sculpts are similar, of course, one has the smirking and one has the frowny face, I think the bodies are so different, and the bodysuit's different. You know, once again, it's a very different feel for what kind of figure that you've gotten here. And lastly, we do have the previous PX exclusive. That is the Sovereign Knight Batman in his blue and gray color scheme. I like this version a lot, and I think that very fairly, a lot of people still say it's their favorite of the trilogy. You know, I've always been a Dark Knight Returns person myself, big time. It was the story that truly, I think, awakened me as a teenager into what Batman could be. So even though I do think this is still your best standard Batman, this is the one you would want for like Justice League kind of displays and things, I like this one better. I think that this is more regal. You can see because, look, the colors here are so different in the blue. This is almost more of a muted, almost purpley kind of blue, which is great. You know, I love their color choice there. But it's no match for this. It's no match for this. I think that there's more happening here, and there's more happening with this particular color scheme. This does lead me to one thing that I think a lot of people have mentioned, and I think they were fair to mention it, and that's Batman's lightness of gray with his bodysuit. I do think it's probably a little light. Whereas I thought the original pictures were showing us something that was a little too dark, a little too muted, I think they might have went a little too far the other way with this. I know that nothing's perfect. I know that you could probably take a little bit of Rit dye and just knock that light gray down just a tad, and I think you would have it just about right. But honestly, I mean, it's about right. But I do agree with the critics saying that it might be a little light. And the last accessory that we have is Batman's I'm getting too old for this head.
I'm too old for this.
There it is. Looks just as good as it ever did with the other releases. I do wish that they had found a way to have varied this up a little more, because it's something that we got continually with each release. There has hardly been any difference in it from release to release, and it's still just as great as it ever was. Honestly, I don't know what they would have done to have made it any different. So I'm asking for something without giving any thought to what it even could have been. but I still think it looks great, and there's something about it that tends to, I don't know, it works a little better on this release. I think before I've talked about how the head maybe seemed a little bulbous, maybe a little large, the unmasked head especially, when it come to this body. But it might be the boldness of the light color on the bodysuit making the body look a little bit bigger. But I think there's some kind of optical illusion here that makes the head seem more appropriate for the body. So make no mistake, I do believe that unless Mezco has some sort of surprise that we're not privy to, and let's face it, they are full of surprises. They announce things at the drop of a hat with just a couple of hours notice. That's one of the reasons why they stay so dynamic and so exciting as a company, no matter how much it drives us crazy sometimes. This is probably the final figure I'll be reviewing from Mezco's Batman trilogy. And it's been quite a journey. From the Ascending Knight, which is rather humble beginnings, I think, for the Batman figure line, to people really taking notice of the Sovereign Knight, and then I believe effectively being blown away by the Supreme Knight. I really do think that it's been a matter of each release being a little bit better than the last, and with Supreme Knight being a quantum leap forward for that line. And so I think what we've gotten is a terrific, and I mean terrific, spread of 12th scale Batman figures that are as fantastic as we have ever seen from any company. You have 3 absolutely distinct flavors of Supreme Knight: the Shadow version, the PX version, and the original. And I think each one delivers something very different. I think each one delivers something totally unique to that experience, to that Batman look, to that artistry that we've seen over the years. As a matter of fact, I'm not afraid to say that these are better, much better, than their original Dark Knight Returns series of figures that they've done. And I think that these are the 3 that you need to have all of the different statements about the character visually that you could ever want. So whether you're doing the Shadow version, whether it's the PX version, or the standard release, you've got 3 very, very strong versions of Batman in his older years. So make no mistake that these 3 versions are definitely 3 shades of the same concept. You have Batman in his older years. This is sort of an homage to that Dark Knight Returns kind of feel. But instead of this being very specifically a certain version, I think that this is conveying flavor. I think it's conveying tone in their most different configurations. And of course, there's so much mixing and matching that can go on within reason that you struggle to even see the resemblance anymore between the figures. So whether you are talking about the Shadow version, the MDX, the PX version with the classic comic colors, or the original version with more of the Dark Knight Returns colors, I think you have just a beautiful interpretation of the Dark Knight, and I'd be lying if I said that they just all 3 weren't my favorites. I think they're all just iterations on a theme. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this special look at probably what will be the final figure that I'll be reviewing in the Batman trilogy from Mezco. I've certainly enjoyed my time with the line, and I think that it's brought something really special to my shelf that I don't think any company will be looking to top anytime soon when it comes to that 12th scale. Of course, if you've enjoyed the review, you'll find many more like it if you go back through our previous videos. And so please, feel free to go back through. I'll try to link to as many as I can below. And I hope that you find something that you enjoy in there, something that maybe informs you on your purchases. Guys, I want to thank you once again for watching our review today. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, we would love it if you would subscribe and check out some of our other videos. We have many more just like it, of course. And of course, I would love to hear your comments down below. And the question that I have for you is one that I think a lot of people debate back and forth on. And that's, what is the best part, the highlight of the Mezco Batman trilogy for you? What do you think was the high point when they really nailed everything that they were going for? Which figure, what version? I'd love to hear it down below. And of course, we love to actually get in real discussions, real conversations with our viewers here at Fanboys Forever. So please don't be shy. Let us know down below. We'd love to hear your opinion as well. Guys, God bless you and yours. Be safe out there, and I'll see you on Fanboys Forever. Fanboy out.